Is that all of them? I said it, 4 words to my steward in the 14th minute of the choosing, with my chin on my fist and the sun coming through the high slot windows in white bars across the floor of the hall. 4 words. I have been king of Vespergate for 11 years. I have signed roads through villages. I have refused grain to a hold that lied about its stores. I have put my name under an execution and slept the same night. Nothing I have ever done cost what those 4 words cost, and I said them the way a man asks whether the door is shut. That's the roll, my lord, Osric Penn said. He had the book open on his forearm, the way he had held it for 40 years, and his thumb was already moving to close it. And a woman standing 8 feet from my chair said, "No. I want you to understand what the hall was like. Outside, over the sleeve, the Swifts were in their 3rd week. 100,000 of them, maybe more. Nobody has ever counted the Swifts and lived to finish, pouring out from under the brow at first light, and turning over the gorge in a single screaming sheet until dusk. In summer, you do not hear yourself think in Vespergate. You hear yourself think in the gaps. Every conversation in my kingdom is conducted in the gaps." So when she said no, it fell into one of those gaps and the whole hall heard it, and the whole hall laughed. Not cruelly. That is the thing I have had to sit with. There was no cruelty in it. It was the laugh you give when a dog wanders into a right. She was dressed for the rope walk, tarred canvas to the knee, a coil of line over her shoulder, her hands black to the second knuckle, and her forearms gone the color of old brick from the sun coming up off the water. Nobody had told her she couldn't be there because nobody had noticed she was. There were 60 women in that hall in their mother's good linen, and 1 gorge walker, and I had looked straight through her for 14 minutes. Osric Penn said, gently because he was a gentle man, "Girl, this is the choosing." "I know what it is," she said. "Your name isn't on the roll." "No," she said, "it never has been." And she looked at me. I have been looked at by ambassadors, by my father on his last day, by a wolf with an arrow in it. I have never in my life been looked at the way that woman looked at me across 8 feet of white sunlight, and I could not have told you then what was in it. I can tell you now. It was recognition. It was the look you give a man you have already buried and forgiven and stopped forgiving. "Come forward then," I said. My voice came out wrong. Too loud, pitched for the gap, and the gap had closed and the Swifts were screaming again, so I ended up shouting at her. "Come forward and be entered." She did not move. "I'm not here to be chosen," she said. "Then why are you here?" "To hear you say it," she said. "Say what?" "You already did." And she turned around and walked out of my hall. 60 women in good linen stood there with their hands at their sides. Roswin of Ardenhead, who I was going to marry, who any sensible kingdom would have wanted me to marry, and who was standing 3 steps below the dais with her chin up and her face perfectly still, turned and watched the woman go. And I saw Roswin's brows come together very slightly, the way they did when she found a mistake in a treaty. Osric Penn cleared his throat and said, "Shall I continue, my lord?" And I said, "Who was that?" He looked down at his book. He turned a page. He turned it back. And then Osric Penn, who had made the whole of Vespergate legible, every soul, every rope, every crossing, every death, said the words that ended his good opinion of himself, and he said them without knowing it, exactly as I had said mine. "My lord," he said, "she isn't in here." I did not sleep that night. I told myself it was the birds. The Swifts do not stop at dusk. They only go up. When the light goes off the water, they climb until you cannot see them, and they stay up there all night, and the sound comes down through the rock and gets into the stone of the castle, and you hear it in your teeth. In summer, the men of my household sleep with wax. I never have. My father never did. He used to say a king who cannot hear his kingdom is a king who has stopped listening, which was, I now believe, the single most self-flattering thing that man ever said, and he said many. At the second hour, I gave it up and went out onto the parapet. Vespergate at night is the most beautiful thing I know, and I say that as a man who has seen it every night of his life. Understand the shape of it. The sleeve is a gorge 400 feet deep, and just narrow enough at the neck that a fool with a good arm can throw a stone across it. Over the northern lip the whole cliff leans out, the brow, a shelf of rock 150 feet thick that overhangs the water like a hand held over a candle, and under that hand the town is built. Every roof in my capital has stone above it. It has never once rained on the Vespergate market. The swifts nest in the brow, in 10,000 cracks, and their noise comes down and fills the town like water fills a cup. And across the sleeve, from the town side to the road side, from my gate to the wide world, runs the long arch, 9 spans of red sandstone, built by my grandfather and finished by my father, carrying the only road out of Vespergate that a cart can use. I stood on the parapet and looked at it, and I thought, she came up the rope walk. Because that is who they are, the gorge walkers. There are perhaps 30 of them. They live under the bridge. Not literally, they live in the low town, but their work is beneath it. The ropes that hang under the arches, the netting, the sounding lines, the 60-year cables that hold the scaffoldways they use to inspect the courses of stone from below. Twice a year, and after every hard rain, a gorge walker goes out under the road on a plank 2 hands wide with 400 feet of nothing under her, and puts her palm flat on the underside of Vespergate and reads it. Nobody watches them do it. There is nothing to watch. They are on the far side of the thing everybody else is standing on. And I stood on my parapet at the 2nd hour of the morning, and I remembered the smell of her hands. I want to be exact about this, because it is the part I cannot explain and have stopped trying to. I had not smelled her hands. I had never been within 8 feet of her. But standing there, I knew the way you know the shape of your own stairs in the dark, that her hands smelled of rope tar and burnt sugar, and that the burnt sugar was from the little iron pan she kept on a shelf by the door, and that when she was very old the tar came off and the sugar stayed. When she was very old. I had seen a woman of perhaps 24 years, standing in the sun with a coil of line on her shoulder. I went inside and drank a cup of water and stood in my own chamber with my hand on the table like a man who has been struck, and I did the only thing that has ever steadied me in my life, which is that I began to count. The stones in the wall, the swifts I could still hear, the years of my reign, and I understood, some way down the count, that I was a man who counted because counting is the cheapest possible form of attention. You can count a hall full of women in 14 minutes. You can look at one of them for 14 minutes and learn less and know more. I sent for Osric Penn at dawn. "There is no Avis Roque," he said. "You have her name." I asked in the low town. He would not sit. He stood in my study with the book under his arm and the light coming up green off the gorge, and he looked like a man who has found a hole in the floor of a house he built. They gave it to me freely. Avis Roque, gorge walker, 24 years, the 5th of her line to hold a rope under the long arch, and she is in no roll of mine, my lord. Not the birth roll, not the trade roll, not the crossing book. Nowhere. "That's not possible." "It is entirely possible," he said, "and I have spent the night learning how." He opened the book at a place he had marked with his thumb, and his thumb was shaking, which I had never seen. "The rope roll of the long arch is kept by house, not by hand. It has been kept that way since my predecessor's time because the ropes are inherited, and it is the rope we are recording. Here." He turned it toward me. "Roque of the 4th Pier, under that name every splice and every sounding for 110 years. "Then where is she?" "She is there, my lord. She is every entry on that page. Her father died 9 years ago, and nobody changed the name at the top because nobody had to, because the rope did not change." He shut the book. "We did not lose her. We never had her. She has walked under this bridge 4,000 times and put her hand on it and told us it was sound, and the kingdom of Vespergate has written down, Roque." I said, "Enter her." "My lord." Now today, her name, her years, her father, her ropes. Osric Penn stood very still. Then he said, in a voice I did not know he had, "And the other 400, my lord, shall I enter them as well?" I stared at him. You asked me a question once, he said. In your first year, you asked how many souls were in Vespergate. I said 11,000 and some hundreds. I gave you a number in under a minute and you were pleased with me and I was pleased with myself. He put his hand flat on the cover of his book, an old man's hand, spotted. I have been up all night with the trade rolls. Every craft in this kingdom that inherits its tools is rolled by house. The rope, the kiln, the mill shares, the bell ropes. The ferry line, before there was a bridge. He looked at me, and there was no accusation in it at all, which was worse. There are perhaps 400 people in your kingdom who exist only as the name of a thing they hold. Almost all of them are women who did not marry. Outside, the swifts came off the brow in the first hard sheet of the morning, and the noise went up like a wave hitting a wall, and neither of us said anything until it dropped. "Get me a rope," I said. The gorge walkers keep a house at the fourth pier, a low stone shed with the roof cut into the cliff, all of it smelling of tar and hemp and the cold breath that comes up off the water even in high summer. There is a hatch in the floor. You go down through it onto a ledge, and off the ledge onto the walk. Brexteau, master of the arches, met me at the hatch and told me not to go down. "It's not the fall, my lord," he said, when I told him I could manage a plank. "It's that you'll want to talk while you're on it." He was right. I did want to talk, and I could not, because the moment you are under the long arch you understand what the swifts actually are. They do not fly over the gorge. They fly through it, a river of birds running the length of the sleeve at the height of the 7th course of stone, which is to say straight through the space where a man on a plank is standing. They part around you. You feel them go by, 100 small hard bodies a second, close enough that the wind of them moves your hair, and the noise inside the arch is not a scream anymore. It is a solid thing, a pressure, and you cannot hear your own boots and you certainly cannot hear yourself think, and everything you have ever been proud of is suddenly not with you. I went out along the plank with my hand on the guideline and I stopped, because I could not do otherwise, and I stood in the middle of a river of birds under my own road. She was 30 feet along sitting. Not standing, sitting on the plank with her legs over the edge and 400 feet of green air under her heels, both hands up over her head, working a splice into the sounding line where it passed through a ring in the stone. She had a marlinspike in her teeth. She had not looked around. She could not possibly have heard me. She took the spike out of her teeth and said, without turning, "Go back, my lord. You'll do it wrong and I'll have to come get you." I did not go back. It took me a very long time to get to her. When I finally lowered myself down beside her, and I want to be honest, I sat down because my legs put me down, she made room, and went on with the splice, and we sat side by side under Vespergate in the middle of 100,000 birds, and for a while it was simply not possible to speak. Then the sheet thinned, the way it does at the turn of the morning, and the noise fell to something a man could shout through, and she said, "Ask, what is your name?" She laughed. It was a short sound, and it was not kind, and it went into me like a nail because I knew that laugh. I knew how it would sound when she was 60. I knew that it would get better. "That," she said, "is the first question you have ever asked me." "We met yesterday." "We did." She pulled the splice down, tested it with her thumb, and pulled again. Avi's Roque, 24 years old this spring. 84 years old on the 5th of last month when I died in the low town in the back room of the house at the 4th pier, and nobody came because I was not anybody's, and my hands smelled of tar and burnt sugar. The birds went by. "You will want to say something now," she said. "Everybody's first thought is that I'm mad. Your father's was." "My father is dead." "Yes," she said. "In 4 years out of a growth in his throat that hasn't started yet, and he will not tell you it's there, and you will find out from his physician after, and you will not forgive him for it, and you will be right not to." She said this the way a woman reads a list of ropes. "You cannot check that, I know. That's not the one I'm going to give you." I said I could have you taken up for that. "Could," she said, "and in the other one you did. 2 days. Then you let me out because Roswin told you to, and you were embarrassed, and you gave me a purse of 11 marks, and I spent it on a roof for the rope house because the roof leaks and it will leak on you next week if you sit under it, and then you never saw me again for 60 years. She turned her head and looked at me, and the wind of the birds moved her hair off her face. You died at 71. You were a good king. Everyone said so. They said it in the low town too, and they meant it. You made the road across the moor, and you took the toll off the salt, and you never once, in 40 years, came down here. Stop. You asked. I asked your name. And I gave you 60 years of it, Avi's Roke said, which is the only thing I have that you didn't. I will tell you what I believed, sitting on that plank. I believed she was ill. I believed it the way you believe a thing that lets you keep the shape of your own life. There is a kind of fever in the low town in the 3rd week of the Swifts. The physicians call it the noise fever, and it takes the old and sometimes the young, and it makes them speak with enormous calm about things that are not there. I sat on a plank under my bridge and I built her a diagnosis, stone by stone, and it was a good one. And it took me about 40 seconds, and the whole time I was building it, a part of me was thinking. She knew about the roof. Everybody knows about a roof. Give me something, I said. I've given you a good deal. Give me something I can check. My voice cracked on it. I had not raised my voice in 7 years. A king who raises his voice has already lost the room. Something small, tomorrow, something you cannot arrange. She thought about it. That was the thing I would come to know about her and never get used to. She thought about things, not for effect. She simply stopped and went away somewhere and came back. The 9th arch, she said. The one on the roadside over the shallows. Tonight there'll be rain up on the moor. You'll not feel a drop of it here under the brow. You never do. And tomorrow, about the middle of the morning, the 9th arch will weep at the 3rd course. Not a leak. A sweat. It'll come out of the joints in a line about as long as your arm, and it'll be gone by noon, and nobody will see it, because nobody is ever under the 9th arch, because there's no walk there, because the walk was never finished. And what does that mean? It means the 3rd course has a crack in the back of it, she said, and it has had one since the year before you were born, and in 31 years there'll be a flood and the 9th arch will go, and 11 people on the road will go with it. And I told a master of the arches in the other one when I was 50, and he came out and looked, and there was nothing to see, because it was noon. She wound the tail of the splice around her wrist and bit the end off. The trouble with being right, my lord, is the hour. Why are you telling me? Because you're going to send a man out at 10 in the morning and he's going to see it, she said. And then you're going to believe me about the rest, and I am going to make you pay for that with the only thing I want. Which is? Avi's Roke stood up on the plank the way you, or I, stand up on a floor. Not that, she said. Not yet. You'll only give it to me, and you'd give it the way you give everything, and I'd have it, and it wouldn't have cost you a thing. She picked up her coil. Go up, my lord. The sheet turns at noon, and you'll be sick. Wait. And when you go up, she said, look at the wolves. Here is what the wolves of the sleeve do and had always done, and what nobody in Vespergate had ever once remarked upon in my hearing, because it is simply what they do, the way the swifts come out from under the brow. They sleep on the 9th arch. The road runs 9 spans and the pack lies down on the 9th, always in the middle of the road in the sun, 40 of them. So that the carts have to go round through the dust at the edge, and every carter in my kingdom has cursed them, and none has ever moved them, because they are the king's wolves, and I am the king, and my wolf is somewhere among them, and has been since I was 19. They lie in a rough oval about 20 feet long. In winter they lie in the same place, in snow, on stone, when there is warm, dry ground 100 yards on. When they were driven off the road during the works in my father's time, they went back the same night. I came up the hatch at noon, green in the face, and I walked the length of my own bridge to the 9th arch, and I stood in the dust at the edge of the road and looked at 40 sleeping wolves lying in a shape on the stone, and I saw for the first time in 31 years that the shape was the shape of a slab. They were lying on the keystone. At 10 the next morning, I sent Brextow out under the 9th arch on a bosun's chair with 2 men on the rope, and at 20 past 10, he came up with his hat in his hand, and his face the color of the stone. "There's a sweat on the 3rd course, my lord," he said. "How long?" "About the length of your arm." Roswin of Ardenhead was standing at my shoulder. I had not asked her to be there. She had come because she had heard, from Osric Pen, that the king had gone under the bridge and come up strange, and Roswin has never in her life waited to be sent for when she could arrive instead. "Hallam," she said, quietly in the gap, "say it to me now so that you don't have to say it to anyone else." I said, "There is a woman who says she has lived this once already." Roswin looked out at the long arch for a while. "You should know about Roswin of Ardenhead, because everything that is about to happen to her is undeserved, and she made it turn out well anyway. She was 29. She had negotiated the Salt Treaty when she was 22, and her father took the credit and she let him, because she wanted the treaty more than the credit, and I had wanted to marry her from the moment I understood that about her. There was no love in it. There was something better than the kind of love men my age were writing songs about that year. There was a total absence of pretending. We had agreed to be married in the autumn. We had agreed on it the way you agree on a bridge. "Does she want you?" Roswin asked. "No," I said, and the flatness of my own voice surprised me. "She refused me in front of the hall." "I saw," Roswin said. "I've thought about very little else." "Why?" "Because I have watched every woman in this kingdom want you for 11 years, she said, "including me, in the way I am able to want things, and I have never once seen anyone not want you, and I found that I did not know what a person looked like who did not want the king of Vespergate." She turned around. "Now I do. She looked like a woman waiting for a debt. I did not go down to her for 6 days. That was cowardice, and I will not dress it as strategy. I sent men instead. I had the 3rd course of the 9th arch sounded from the road, and from a chair, and by 3 different masters, and every one of them came back and said the stone was good. I had the rope house roof mended, which took a day and cost 4 marks, and I stood in it afterward, in the smell of tar and the cold breath of the gorge, and looked at a shelf by the door with a little iron pan on it, and went out and was sick behind the shed. On the 2nd night, I dreamed of her hands, and they were old. On the 4th night I woke certain, the way you are certain of your own name in the dark, that she took her tea with the leaves still in it, and had done for 60 years because she could not be troubled, and that it made her teeth gray, and that she did not care, and that I had once told her I did not care either, and she had laughed at me for a lie. I had never given that woman a cup of tea. I want to be precise, because I have had a great deal of time to be imprecise about it, and I have watched myself do it. It was not memory. Memory arrives with a road behind it. This arrived from nowhere, wrong way round, always about her being old, never once about me, and always days late, and never, not one single time in all the years since, about anything I could have used. I never once remembered where a thing was hidden or what a man would say. I remembered the sound of an old woman putting a pan down on a shelf. I have been told since by clever men, by a physician, by a priest who was kinder than either, that a man who wants a thing badly enough will remember it into existence. I have no argument. I have never had an argument. There is no mark on either of us. There was never a mark. My wolf did nothing at all. He did not rise, he did not still, he did not know her from a fence post, and I have come to think that is the truest thing in this account. Whatever passed between me and Avi's Roke did not come through any of the doors the songs describe. It came through the wrong door, days late, carrying nothing I could sell. On the 6th day I went down to the 4th pier, and Avi's Roke was sitting on the step of the rope house in the sun mending a net, under a roof that no longer leaked, and she looked at me and said, "Well," and I did the thing I had never done in my life, which was that I sat down on the step next to her and asked her a question, and then stopped talking. "What do you want?" She kept mending. The net came up and down, and the swifts went over, and I sat with my hands between my knees like a boy, and I let the silence be hers. And it went on so long that the sheet turned and the noise came up and dropped again, and I did not feel it. That, Avi's Roke said at last, took you 60 years. Then she put the net down. There's a stone, she said, the 9th keystone. Your grandfather set the 9th arch and your father closed it the year before you were born, and no hand has turned that stone since it went in. She looked at me sideways. There's a word cut on the face of it that's lying down against the arch. Nobody has ever seen it. Nobody living ever will unless you lift it. How could you know that? Because in 31 years there'll be a flood, she said, and the 9th arch will fall, and 11 people will die on that road, and I will go down to the shallows in the low water in the autumn with the rest of the town to take the stone back for the rebuilding. And I will be 55 years old, and I will stand in the river up to my knees, and I will turn that stone over with a bar, and I will read what is cut in it. And I will tell your son, and he will not believe me, because he will be his father's boy, and I will be an old woman with gray teeth, and no name in any book in Vespergate. The net lay across her knees. Lift it now, said Avi's Roke. Before the 11, lift it in front of them all. I said, it may bring the arch down. Yes, she said, it may. The council sat for 4 hours and I let it. That was new. My council knew 3 shapes of me. The king who has decided, the king who is deciding, and the king who is waiting for someone to say the thing he has already thought of so that he can agree with it and let them believe they were useful. What sat at the head of the table that afternoon was none of the 3, and it unnerved them worse than a rage would have. I asked Breck Stowe what the 9th keystone weighed. I asked him what it was bedded on. I asked what would happen to the 2 courses under it if the load came off wrong, and when he told me, I asked him what he meant, and when he explained I asked him again, because I had not understood the first time and I could feel myself preparing to nod. Ronald Cobb, who was master of the works in '68 and had put his own hands to the 9th arch as a young man, said what everybody was thinking. My lord, it's the only road. I know it. There is no other cart road out of Vespergate, not one. If that arch comes down, we are a town of 11,000 people under a rock with a footpath. He was not shouting. He was speaking with dreadful patience, the way you speak to a man on a ledge. Everything we eat in winter comes over that stone, everything. And you propose to take the crown out of the arch, the one stone that makes the other stones an arch, because a rope walker had a dream. She has not had a dream, I said. She has had a sweat on the 3rd course, which we cannot find. Because you look at noon. Ronald Cobb's face closed. Osric Penn, at my left, had not spoken in an hour. He had his book shut in front of him with both hands flat on it, and he had the look of a man in church. Ronald, I said, how was the 9th arch closed? Sir, the Chronicle, my father's year, read it to me. He did not need to read it. Every child in my kingdom can say it, the way they say the names of the 9 arches skipping rope. And Ronald Cobb said it with his chin up, because he had been there. And in the 40th year the 9th arch was closed in the king's name, and the king went over, and the sleeve was bridged. In the king's name, I said, not by the king's hand. My father was in the north that summer. It is in his own letters. I looked down the table. Who closed it? Silence. Under it, over the water, the sheet of swifts turned and the noise came up and lay on us like a hand. The masons, Ronald said at last. There were 40 of us. Name them. My lord. Name the one who took the last measure, I said, before the crown went in. Name the hand that stood under the arch and said it will stand. Because there is always one, Ronald. You have told me so yourself. You told me when I was 15. The last measure is 1 pair of hands and 1 mouth. And the mouth says yes, and then the stone goes in and the centering comes out. Who was it? It is 9 years since your book was written and you were there. Ronald Cobb opened his mouth. He stood there in front of his king with his mouth open, and I watched a man of 68 go through the whole of a summer in his head, 40 years back, and come out the other side with nothing. "I don't recall," he said. And Osric Pen lifted his hands off his book and said, in the mildest voice in the world, "There are 406 of them, my lord." The table turned. "I have finished the count," he said. He did not open the book. He had the look of a man who no longer needed to. 406 living souls in Vespergate who are written down only as a thing they hold. The rope, the kiln, the ferry line, the bell. 381 of them are women. He set his palms together. "If it please the council, I should like to say the first of them aloud, because I have been 40 years a steward and I have never once said any of their names, and it is not the fault of my book. My book does what it was made to do. It counts what we decided to count." He said her name, Avis Roke. Then he said 11 more, and I did not stop him, and Ronald Cobb sat down slowly in the middle of it and put a hand over his eyes, and by the 8th name the whole council was looking at the table, and outside my window 100,000 birds screamed at a gorge that did not care, and I thought, this is what a kingdom sounds like when it hears itself for the first time. "Lift it," I said. Roswin of Ardenhead came to me that night before I could go to her, because she is faster than I am and always was. She did not knock. She came in with 2 cups and set them down and poured, and she had brought the good northern wine that she does not particularly like and I do, and I understood before she said a word that she was ending it and had chosen to end it kindly and had thought about the wine. "Rose." "No," she said, "let me. If you say it I will have to be gracious, and I would rather be accurate." She sat down across from me. "I am going to release you," she said, "and I want it understood in this room that I am not doing it out of pity or love or defeat, because in 10 years' time somebody will write it down that the king's betrothed stepped aside for a rope walker, and it will be a very pretty sentence and it will be a lie." She turned her cup around. "I am doing it because I have watched you for 6 days and you have started asking questions. And you wait now. You did not use to wait. You would ask a thing and then answer it yourself in the same breath, and I thought that was simply the shape of your mind and that I would spend my life finishing your sentences for you, and I had made my peace with it, and I had decided that a treaty is worth a marriage." She looked up. "But I would like to see what you turn into, and you will not turn into it beside me, because I have never once in 11 years told you a thing you did not want to hear, Hallam. Not once. I told myself that was diplomacy. It was habit and I was good at it, and it was doing you harm." I could not speak. "There is a crack in the 3rd course," Roswin said, "and it has been there since before you were born, and 40 men sounded it from the road and found it good, because you cannot hear a crack from the side you are standing on. You have been sounded from the road your whole life. Everyone in this kingdom has stood on top of you and said it's sound." She stood. "Somebody has been underneath, telling the truth to nobody. That is all. That is the whole of it, and it has nothing to do with love, and I think you should stop calling it destiny, because it isn't. It is a woman who was right for 60 years in an empty room." At the door she stopped. "When you lift the stone," Roswin said, "I would like to be on the road, not for you. I have been master of the Salt Treaty and everything but the writing since I was 22, and I find I would like to see, once in my life, what it looks like when the thing gets written down properly." They lifted the 9th keystone on the 2nd day of the last week of the Swifts. It took 9 days to prepare, and I was there for all of them. Ronald Cobb built a centering under the arch, a great oak cradle to take the thrust when the crown came out, the same shape as the one his masters had taken away 40 years before, and he built it from their drawings. And on the 4th day he stopped in the middle of the works and came and found me and said, "The drawings are signed, my lord. At the corner. Not with a name, with a mark. It's a marlinspike." I said, "Whose?" "I don't know," said Ronald Cobb, and I watched what that cost him, and I did not make it easier for him, because it was not mine to make easier. Avis Roke worked 11 of those 9 days. That is not a figure of speech. She worked the days and the nights of them. She hung the sounding lines herself, 16 of them, one at every joint that mattered, each with a lead plumb on it so that a man on the road could see, at a glance, whether the stone below him had moved a hair. She would not let Breck Stow's men do it. She said, without heat, that they had never once been under the ninth arch, and that this was not their fault, and that it meant their hands did not yet know what the stone said when it was lying and what it said when it was tired. I asked her, on the seventh night, sitting on the step of the rope house with the pan of burnt sugar on the shelf behind us, how she knew the difference. 60 years, she said. You are 24. I am 24, and I have 60 years of a life that isn't going to happen. She held her hands up in the lamplight and turned them over, and they were young hands, brick brown, black to the second knuckle. Almost all of it's rubbish now. You understand. I know the price of salt in a year that won't come. I know the names of children who will never be born because their mothers will marry different men, because you're not going to send Breck Stow to the moor in the spring, because you're standing here instead. Every day I'm alive, more of it turns to smoke. She dropped her hands. There's only two kinds of thing I've got left. The stone and the water and the birds and the way an arch tells you it's dying. That's one kind because rock doesn't care what a king does and the crack is in the third course whatever I say to you. The other kind is what people are like. She looked at me. You were a good king, my lord, in the other one. That was the worst of it. I couldn't even hate you properly. Avies. Don't, she said it fast. Don't say a soft thing to me on a step. I've had 60 years to imagine you saying soft things to me, and I killed the habit in the end, and it took me until I was about 70, and it was the single hardest piece of work of my life, and I will not do it twice. She stood up and took her coil. Ask me about the stone. What happens when you lift it? That's the first thing you've asked me that I don't know, said Avies Roke, and she smiled, and it was the first time, and it went into me exactly the way the laugh had. We cleared the road at dawn, and the road would not clear. The wolves were on the keystone. They had lain on that stone in the middle of the ninth arch every day of my life and every day of my father's, 40 of them, so that the carts went round through the dust, and every carter in Vespergate had cursed them, and none had ever moved them. Breck Stow's men would not go near. I walked out and stood over my own wolf, gray through the muzzle now, 12 years old, who had come to me out of the sleeve when I was 19, and had never once done anything I asked because he was not a dog and had never pretended to be, and I said his name, and he did not lift his head. They'll not shift for you, said a carter, delighted from the back of the crowd. They never have. Avies Roke walked past me, put her hand flat on the road 18 inches from the wolf's nose, and said, Move. You great article, we're taking your floor up. The pack got up. They got up the way animals get up when a thing they have been waiting for has finally arrived, without hurry and all together. They went 20 feet to the road edge and turned around and lay down again in a rough oval, facing the stone, and they stayed there for the whole of that day and the whole of that night, and a great sound went through the crowd on the road, and I heard men say the word sign, and I heard women say it too. I have thought about this for a long time. The stone in the middle of the ninth arch is the last stone on the bridge to lose the sun, and the swifts pour through the arch beneath it all day, and the rock is warm from the middle of the morning to the middle of the night. There is not a warmer, safer, more sheltered 20 feet of ground between the brow and the moor. Any beast in the world would lie there. My wolf lay there because it was warm. And Avies Roke said move, and they moved, and they had never moved for me, and I would give a very great deal to be able to tell you that this proved something. It proved that she spoke to them as though they were in the room. That is all it has ever proved. She never once claimed otherwise. When the priest later told the town that the wolves had risen for the true Luna of Vespergate, she was standing at the back of the crowd, and she said, not loudly, but she said it, they rose because a woman told them to get up. The crowd wanted the other thing. The crowd has always wanted the other thing. The chains went on at the 8th hour. I will not pretend I understood the half of it. There were sheer legs of oak 40 feet high, and a triple purchase, and a great iron ring in the crown of the stone that Ronald Cobb's masters had set there 40 years before precisely, so that a later, humbler generation might one day have to lift it. And Ronald wept a little when he uncovered the ring, and turned away so that his men would not see, and his men saw. Avi's roke was under the arch. Of course she was under the arch. She lay on a plank 2 hands wide at the level of the 7th course with the birds going through her hair, and she had a slate, and Breck Stowe was on a chair 30 feet from her with the 2nd slate, and between them they had the 16 plumb lines, and the whole weight of Vespergate. I stood on the road with Roswin of Ardenhead on my right and Osric Penn on my left with his book open and a pen in his hand, and I gave the order, and the chains took the strain, and every soul on that bridge stopped breathing at once. The stone moved a finger's width. Somewhere under my feet, 400 feet of stone let go of itself and found itself again. You do not hear it. You feel it come up through your boots and into your knees, a long, sick shrug as though the world has turned over in bed. The centering groaned. Somebody screamed. And down under the road, through the birds and the chains and the 11,000 people holding their breath on the cliffs, came a woman's voice, absolutely flat, calling the joints. 5th's holding, 6th's holding. 6th is holding Breck, look at it. 3rd course is opening, that's the crack, that's her, she's opening east and she'll stop. How do you know she'll stop? Ronald Cobb bellowed over the edge. Because I've watched her do it for 60 years, said Avi's roke. Lift. We lifted. It came out of the arch at the 11th hour of a white morning, 1,500 weight of red sandstone, black at the bed, coming up out of the road into the sun for the first time since the year before I was born. It turned very slowly on the chains. 11,000 people watched a stone turn. And the hidden face came round. There was a word cut in it. Deep, a good hand, a mason's hand, letters as long as my forearm, cut on the side that would lie down against the arch and never in this world be seen by anyone. Under the word, cut small, a marlinspike. The word was Marth. Osric Penn read it aloud. His voice broke on it, and then he read it again, steady, because it was his office to be accurate. Marth, he said, it is a woman's name. Ronald Cobb had gone the color of ash. He was staring at the letters, and his lips were moving, and I said, Ronald. And he did not hear me. And I said it again, and he turned round, and there was a look on his face I have never got out of my head, which was the look of a man being handed something he put down 40 years ago and swore he had never held. Marth Coyle, he said, she walked the ropes. The bridge was so quiet that I could hear the plumb lines ticking against the stone. She was 50, he said. She had walked under the 8 arches all her life and her mother before her. She took the last measure of the 9th. She stood in the centering under the crown with a lamp for a night and a day and came up and said it would stand. He was looking at the word. We put the stone in on her word. 40 men, and we all knew it, and we cheered her, my lord, in the low town. We cheered her. And then in the autumn the king came south and went over the bridge, and the chronicle was written. And it says the arch was closed in the king's name. Yes. Where is she? She died in the low town, said Ronald Cobb. I don't know the year. I don't know who buried her. I was a young man, and I was made master of the works. He put his hand out and touched the road. And the masons cut her name in the stone before we set it face down, where no chronicle could get at it. And I have spent 40 years telling the story of the 9th arch, and I have never once said her name, and I did not know, until this hour, standing here, that I had decided not to. Osric Penn opened his book. He did not ask my leave. He turned to the empty page at the back where a steward keeps nothing, and he dipped his pen, and he wrote. I watched him write it, Marth Coyle of the ropes, took the last measure of the 9th arch and closed it, and the date as near as he could put it, and then his own name under it as witness. Then he looked up at me with tears running down his old face and said the truest thing anybody said that day. My lord, there are 8 other stones. They found her mark on the 4th arch. They found 2 more names on the 6th, one of them a girl of 19 who had died in the works, and a handprint small, pressed into the mortar of the bed before it set, which we have never identified and never will. But that was the autumn, and the men on the ropes then were paid, and rolled, and named. And it was Avi's Roke who wrote the rules by which they worked, and she wrote them on a slate on a plank under the 7th course, and Osric Pen copied them into the book on his knees on the road above, calling down questions and waiting for the answers. That was the autumn. What happened at the 11th hour of that white morning was this. The stone hung on the chains. The word was in the sun. And under the arch, on a plank 2 hands wide, Avi's Roke put her forehead down on the cold stone of the 3rd course and did not lift it for a long time, and the swifts went through her hair, and I stood on the road above her with 1,500 weight of the truth turning slowly over my head, and I found that I could not go to her. I could not go to her because there was nothing I owned that she needed, and for the first time in 11 years of kingship I understood what that meant, and it was not humility, it was terror. Breck Stowe went out along the plank and crouched by her and said something. She lifted her head and said something back. He came in and up and stood in front of me with his hat off. She says the 3rd course wants 40 feet of new stone before the autumn rain, my lord. Tell her yes. She says you're to send Cobb down, not him. And he jerked his chin at a young mason at the back, because Cobb's the only one left who's been under it. Tell her yes. Breck Stowe turned his hat over. And she says, he said, that when the crown goes back in she wants the stone turned, so the name's on the road. I said, where everyone will walk on it. That's what I said, my lord. He looked at me. She says the road is where the kingdom is. She says, put her name where the carts go. She says, a stone with a name on the underside is exactly what she's been trying to explain to you for 2 weeks. Behind me, Roswin of Ardenhead made a small sound. I did not turn round. Tell her yes, I said, and Breck, ask her what she wants. He came back a quarter of an hour later, and he would not meet my eye, and he said, she says she'd like the king to come down and hold the lamp. I held the lamp for 6 hours. That is the whole of what I did, and I have been given credit for a great deal else. And every year since, in the low town, somebody has told me a story about that morning in which I am wiser than I was, and I have learned to let them. But the true account is that a rope walker put me on a plank at the level of the 7th course, and set a lamp in my 2 hands, and told me where to stand and how to stand, and what not to do. And I stood there for 6 hours in a river of birds while she and Ronald Cobb crawled along the underside of my kingdom on their bellies with a spike and a straightedge and a piece of chalk, and I moved when she told me to move. I could not hear her. Nobody can hear anything under the arch in the last week of the Swifts. She had worked that out 60 years ago and had made a language out of it. 2 fingers meant closer. The flat of a hand meant hold. A fist meant put the lamp on the stone and get your hands out of the way. She had taught it to me on the step of the rope house in 10 minutes, and she had not once said, "Do you understand?" She had simply waited until I did it correctly, and then gone on to the next one, which is, I have come to believe, the only respectful way one adult has ever taught another anything. At the 4th hour my arms began to shake. She saw it. She saw everything from a plank 30 feet away with her cheek on the stone, and she came back along the walk and took the lamp out of my hands without a word, and held it herself and pointed at the guideline, meaning go up. I shook my head. She looked at me for a moment. Then she gave me back the lamp and went away up the walk and came back with a strap, and she buckled it round my wrist and round the standing part of the rope, taking my weight off my shoulders, the way you would rig anything that had to hang there a long time and was not designed for it. She did it without any tenderness at all, and it was the single kindest thing anyone had ever done to me, and I stood under my own bridge with tears going sideways off my face in the wind of 100,000 birds, and nobody saw, because nobody was ever under the 9th arch, because there had never been a walk there. At the 6th hour she put her hand flat. Then she took the chalk and wrote on the stone, in letters a foot high, so that a man holding a lamp could read it. It will stand. And she looked at me, and I understood that a woman had written those words on the underside of this arch once before, 40 years ago, by lamplight, alone, and that the king's name had gone into the chronicle, and that Avi's Roke had brought me down here and put the lamp in my hands and made me stand where Marith Coyle stood, for 6 hours, so that I would know in my arms and my back and my shaking hands exactly what it was that Vespergate had decided not to write down. She had never once tried to explain it to me in words. She had known since the day she was born again that I was a man who could not be told a thing. They set the crown back in the 9th arch on the last day of the Swifts, with the name on the road. 11,000 people came up out of the low town to watch it go in, and Ronald Cobb's men bedded it and struck the centering, and the arch took its own weight with a sound like a great old man sitting down, and held. And then the whole kingdom of Vespergate walked over the word Mareth, in ones and twos, all afternoon, carts and dogs and children, and a woman selling plums went over it 4 times and never knew, and by the 3rd year the letters were smoothing at the tops the way lettering does when a road loves it. I had wanted a rail round it. I had wanted, God help me, a little iron rail and a plaque. No, Avi's Roke said. It will wear away. In 200 years. She was sitting on the parapet of the 7th arch with her boots hanging over the sleeve, eating bread. And then some cob will lift it and find it worn, and he'll cut it deeper, and he'll put his mark under it. That's a road, my lord. A rail is a grave. Osric Penn read the roll on the 8th day of autumn. He did it from the steps of the hall in the first quiet of the year, because the Swifts go on the same night every year, all of them at once, at dusk, in a column that goes up off the brow and turns south and is gone, and the silence they leave behind is the loudest thing in Vespergate. For 3 weeks the kingdom cannot hear itself. Then, in an evening, it can, and everybody speaks too softly for a day. Into that silence, Osric Penn read 406 names. It took him 2 hours and 11 minutes. He read the living, the rope, the kiln, the mill shares, the ferry line that had no ferry anymore. He read the trades and the years and where he could get it, the mother's name. He had gone to their doors himself, an old man with a book, and asked and waited and written down what he was told. He got 70 of them wrong and printed the corrections in the spring and read the corrections aloud too, which I am told was resented by exactly nobody and mocked by his enemies, of whom he then had several, because a man who counts what was not counted before will always be told he has spoiled the arithmetic. And when he had done, he read one name that belonged to no living soul and put the book down, and said that the 9th arch of the long arch was closed in the 40th year by Marith Coyle of the ropes, who took the last measure by lamplight and said that it would stand, and that it had stood, and that the chronicle had been wrong for 40 years and was now corrected, by order of the king, in the king's own hearing, on the king's own steps. I had asked him whether we should say it that way. He said, "It is the only way that is true, my lord, and you will not enjoy it." He was right on both counts. Ronald Cobb stood at the front with his hat in his hands and cried like a boy, and afterward he went home and wrote, in the plain hand of a man who has never written anything but a measurement, the account of the summer of the 9th arch, 40 pages, nomming every mason and what each one did, and what Marith Coyle said to him on the 17th of that June, which he had remembered on the 3rd night after the lifting, and had gone downstairs at 2 in the morning to write down before it went again. It is in the hall now. It is the worst written and most valuable document in my kingdom. And Roswin of Ardenhead stood at the back of the crowd with her arms folded and watched a steward read 406 names, and when it was over she came and stood beside me and said, "Well, there it is, written down properly, and neither of us managed to say anything else, and that is what the end of a long engagement is actually like." She married nobody, ever. She has been master of the salt treaty and the writing since the following spring, and has run the northern accounts for 20 years, and once told me, at a bad hour, that she had loved me somewhat and was glad on the whole that it had come to nothing, and that if I ever repeated that she would deny it and be believed, because she was more plausible than I was. I offered Avi's Roke everything I had. I want to set this down honestly, because in the low town they tell it as a great romance, and it was not. It was a fool with his hands full of gifts standing in a doorway. I offered her a place at my table. I offered her the roll of the ropes in her own name with a stipend. I offered to make her master of the arches over Breck Stowe, who would have stood aside and said it was right. I offered to have the rope house pulled down and a stone house built, and when she laughed at that I offered to have it mended instead, and she said it had been mended, and I said, by me, and she said, by 4 men and 4 marks, my lord, and I've thanked them. And on the 9th day of the quiet, on the step, with the pan of burnt sugar on the shelf behind us, I asked her to be my Luna and my queen. She sat with her elbows on her knees for a while. Then she said, in the other one, when I was 55, I stood in the shallows and turned that stone over with a bar, and I read her name, and I went up the gorge road to the castle and asked to see the king. And I stood in a corridor for 2 days. And on the 3rd day a steward came out and told me the king was gracious, but the works were the master's business, and gave me a mark for my trouble, and I took it, because I was 55 and it was a mark. Avi's. You didn't know, she said. That's the whole grief of it. You never knew, and you never once did anything wicked, and you would have been horrified. And I have had 60 years to work out that a man's horror is worth nothing to a woman standing in a corridor. She turned her head. And now you're going to give me a crown because I gave you a stone. That is not why. I believe you, she said. It doesn't help. The gorge was full of that autumn silence. Somewhere down at the 4th pier, a rope was slapping stone. If I marry you now, said Avi's Roke, I will always have been paid. Every day for the rest of my life I will know what I was worth, and it will be 1 keystone, and it was a good stone, but it is not a life. And you'll know it too, whatever you say on the step, and in 11 years you will look at me across a table and think I raised her. She said it without any bitterness at all, which was how she said everything, and it was unendurable. You wouldn't say it. You'd think it once in a bad month, and then you'd hate yourself, because you're not a cruel man. I have watched you not be a cruel man for 60 years, my lord. It is not the same thing as being a good one to me. I said, then what do I do? And Avi's Roke smiled at me, the way she had smiled on the plank. You ask me a question, she said, and you wait for the answer. You've done it twice now. You did it on this step, and you did it under the arch with the lamp. Do it again in a year. A year? I'm going down the gorge road, she said. There's a bridge at Amel that a man wrote to Breck about, and there's a viaduct at the far end of the moor that hasn't been underwalked in 9 years, and there are perhaps 40 women between here and the sea who hang under stone for a living, and not one of them is in any book, and I know the names of 11 of them because they were kind to me when I was old. She stood up and shook out her coil. I'm going to write them down, all of them. And then I'm coming back up this road on my own feet, and I will walk over that stone with her name on it, and I will come to your gate as a woman with a book under her arm and a trade and a name of her own, and not as a thing you found under your bridge. She hung the coil on her shoulder. And then, said Avi's Roke, you can ask me. She went down the gorge road on the 14th day of the quiet. I did not go with her. I did not send men with her, which cost me more than anything I have done as king, because I am a man who solves things by sending men. Breck Stowe wanted to go, and she told him the arches wanted him more, and he stayed, and hated it, and by the spring he had put 4 women on the ropes and rolled them in their own names and stopped hatting it. She wrote to me 11 times in the year. The letters were short and mostly about stone. The bridge at Amel is bedded on clay, and the 3rd pier is walking. Tell Cobb. Once, in midwinter, from a hold 300 miles south, there is a woman here called Senate who has been under the Amel span for 30 years, and her name in the book is Kettle, which is the name of the rope. I have written her down. She cried, and then she was angry with herself for crying, and then she gave me her supper. And once in the spring, only this, you have not asked me for anything in 9 months. I notice. A. I did not sleep much that year either, and it was not the birds because there were no birds. The wrong way memories came all through it, and they never once helped me. I would be signing a road, and I would know suddenly and completely the sound an old woman's boots made on a stair, going up slowly, one at a time, both feet to a step. I would be listening to an ambassador, and I would know that when she was very old she had a habit of stopping halfway across a room to think, and forgetting she had stopped, and standing there, and that people had come to say in the low town, kindly, "There goes Roke, moored again." I never remembered anything I could use. I never remembered where a thing was buried or what a man would say. Once, sitting in council, I remembered the exact weight of a woman of 84 leaning on my arm, and I had never touched her, and I had to leave the room. There is no mark on us. There has never been a mark. My wolf grew old in his turn and lay on the ninth arch and did not care, and when I went out to him he was simply an animal who was warm, and I loved him, and he did not know her name. I have stopped calling it a bond. Roswin was right about that as about most things. It was a fact that arrived in my house from an unlit corridor in pieces at the wrong hours, carrying nothing of use, and the whole of what I made of it, I made with my hands awake on a plank, holding a lamp. Ronald Cobb died in the second week of the Swifts, in his bed, 11 months and some days after the lifting. He had spent the last of his strength on the sixth arch, where they had found the hand print in the mortar, and he had wanted to cut the names of the 2 masons the roll had swallowed, and his hands would not do it any more. So he taught me. That is what I was doing when she came home. The master of the works of Vespergate lay in a bed at the 4th pier with a window over the gorge and the noise coming in. And for 9 days I went down in the morning and sat on the floor of that room with a piece of waste sandstone between my knees and a mallet and a chisel. And an old man dying of nothing in particular corrected my grip. He was a bad teacher, impatient and vain, and he wept easily by then, and twice he called me by his brother's name. He told me the same thing 40 times, that you do not cut a letter, you cut the stone away from a letter, and that the letter is already in there and has been since the world cooled, and the whole art is not to hit the part of the rock that is her name. He died on a Tuesday. I finished the practice stone anyway, because he had told me to and because I could not think what else to do with my hands. Then I went out with 2 masons and a bag of tools and lay down on my back under the 6th arch on a plank 2 hands wide, 400 feet over the water, in the 3rd week of the Swifts, in the worst noise in the world, and I cut a name into the underside of my own bridge. It took me 11 hours across 2 days. The masons offered at reasonable intervals to do it properly. The N is crooked. The first stroke of the E ran because I hit the part of the rock that was her name, exactly as he said I would, and there is a wound in that letter that will be there in 1,000 years. My hands bled. Nobody saw any of it because nobody is ever under the 6th arch, and that was the entire point, and the masons understood it before I did. I came up on the 2nd evening filthy, with my hands wrapped, on the last day of the Swifts. And Avi's Roke was standing on the 9th arch with a book under her arm. She had come up the gorge road on her own feet, as she said she would, and walked over the stone with Marith Coyle's name on it, as she said she would, and she was thinner and browner and her boots were finished, and the book under her arm was fat and swollen with damp and tied with rope yarn, and it had 209 names in it. Neither of us said anything for a while. There was no possibility of saying anything. The sheet was turning over the sleeve, the last turn of the last day, 100,000 birds pouring through the arches under our feet, and we stood on the road in that unbearable noise and looked at each other, and she saw my wrapped hands and her face changed. Then the Swifts went up. They do it all at once. There is no signal that anyone has ever found. The whole river of them comes up out of the sleeve in a column as thick as a tower, turning, going up past the brow and past the castle and up into a green evening sky higher, until they are a smoke, and then a thread, and then they are gone south and there are no birds over Vespergate. and the silence comes down on the kingdom like a hand on a shoulder. In that first silence, the loudest, the one everybody in my country stands still for once a year all their lives, I could hear a rope slapping stone at the fourth pier, and a dog somewhere in the low town, and Avi's roke breathing. I did not offer her anything. I had spent a year emptying my hands. Avi's roke, I said, will you have me? And then, because she had taught me, and because it was the whole of what she had ever asked of any man in 2 lives, I stopped talking. I did not fill it. I stood in the silence with my ruined hands at my sides and let it belong to her, and it went on a long time, long enough that Osric Penn, watching from the gate with his book, later said he thought I had been refused, long enough that she looked away from me and out along the 9 arches and down at the road under her feet. She said, "You've cut something." Under the 6th. Whose? Yours, I said. It's badly done. The inn is crooked. Cobb died before he could teach me the rest, and I would not let them fix it, and it will be there when the road is gone. Avi's roke stood on the 9th arch of the long arch of Vespergate for a while, in the first silence of the year, with 209 names under her arm. "Then I'll want to see it," she said. "I'll go down in the morning, you can hold the lamp."